let's hone in on at least one of those headline stories now. NPA head Advocate Shamila Batohi set to brief the media amid the departure of Investigating Directorate head Advocate Hermoine Cronje. Cronje's resignation coming amid growing impatience from the public that no major arrests have been made in high-profile investigations, including the Guptas, Prasa, Transnet, to name just a few. News 24's legal journalist Karyn Maughan joins us now to unpack, in part, Karyn, what to expect from the briefing. But I perhaps want to begin by asking you this. Given your knowledge of what's unfolded in the NPA over the past few years, the assertion that there are saboteurs in the ranks of the NPA still, that it is battling, amongst other things, shrinking budgets as well. Are you surprised by this decision from Hermoine Cronje?
I think, there will be a temptation for people to bring this into the dynamics of personality issues or possible fraught relationship between her and the NDPP, Shamila Batohi, who sought, certainly in responses to News 24, to basically downplay a suggestion that there was a personality issue, but admitting that the kind of business of prosecuting high-profile corruption matters is innately stressful, and there are tensions linked to that. But I don't think it would be wise to make this strictly speaking about the personalities of those two individuals. Hermoine Cronje, if you have ever dealt with her, is someone who is immensely passionate about fighting corruption. She has worked in the NPA before. She has been very outspoken about her plans, what she wants to do. And for her to walk away from this position with basically 3 years left in her term speaks to huge levels of frustration, I think, about the kind of dysfunctionalities which appear very evidently to exist within the NPA. And we can say quite categorically that those dysfunctions do exist because of precisely the issues that you've raised in terms of, the large-scale alleged state capture corruption, the sign-off matter, the apartheid prosecutions that have been a subject of pressure for quite some time. The NPA has simply not moved. And we're still, a number of the people who are most seriously implicated in either blatant incompetence or alleged corruption are still within the ranks of the prosecution's leadership.
I mean, what you're saying there, if we're to understand in the broader scope of what the NPA is dealing with at the moment, how hollowed out is this organization that really we've been waiting with bated breath for them to act on several allegations of and evidence of corruption at the state capture inquiry?
Michelle, the issue is this. When Hermoine Cronje appeared before Parliament, I think in July this year, which is around about the time that we now know these potential discussions about a resignation were emerging, President Cyril Ramaphosa, we know, got involved to try and assist her in kind of, dealing with the resource constraints that she was raising. She said, we haven't seen a large-scale corruption prosecution for over a decade. The last one that we really saw was the prosecution by the then Scorpions, Harry Nell, of Jackie Salibi. You and I will remember that case. But we haven't seen anything of that scale again. Billy Downer, of course, trying to prosecute the former president, Jacob Zuma, also in a Scorpions linked, that was a Scorpions case. But in terms of, life past the Scorpions, we haven't seen anything. And problematically, there is an argument to be made. Large-scale corruption is difficult to prosecute. The arms deal, it took them years and years to formulate charges in terms of the very limited prosecutions that they did. But there are also slam-dunk cases that can be prosecuted and aren't being prosecuted. Not least of all, the insider trading evidence against Marcus Jooste for Steinhoff, which remains South Africa's version of Enron. And with the NPA not moving on those so-called slam-dunk cases, the question remains, well, why is that? Is the level of skill at such a low level that you're not prepared to take on a case that seemingly looks like it should be easily winnable, given that there was a finding of insider trading anyway? I think South Africa and the NPA might, there seems to be this paralysis where they're so obsessed or focused on doing these huge-scale corruption that they're not taking the small wins that would give the South African public a degree of faith that actually there is movement. Because I think the average South African just wants to see someone convicted and just wants to see someone being sentenced. And from there on in, I think the NPA would have at least a little bit of momentum and public faith to go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, Karyn, the next question then is, the state capture inquiry has been sitting for some years now. We've heard devastating evidence presented there, time after time, depending on who the witnesses were on the stand. What is this kind of decision from Hermoine Cronje, the inferences it makes about the capacity of the NPA, what does it mean for the work of the Zondo inquiry, which is concluding its work in a few weeks' time?
Hermoine Cronje was the official, and I know this because I've been reporting on for quite some time, who interacted directly with the state capture inquiry. Of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa releasing those regulations that allowed for that cooperation. I know that a lot of the investigators within the inquiry are quite devastated by this news, because when they were not being paid by the through Justice Department budgets because of all kinds of bureaucratic hoops, she was advocating for ID budgets to potentially be used to pay their salaries. And unfortunately, that didn't happen because of various proper procurement practices, etc., that needed to be adhered to. But she certainly has been one of the biggest advocates for the state capture inquiry. She's come out and said the evidence that they've got has been invaluable, that they've assisted, they've provided huge levels of skills and resources that the NPA did not have. I know in written responses to News 24, the NPA has said that a number of those state capture inquiry investigators will be moving over to the NPA, but it remains unclear at this point, Michelle, whether they will have security of tenure there, because one of the issues that seems to exist is that while people are offered contracts, they're not necessarily offered permanent employment. And the level of skills that such investigators bring are in high demand all over the country. So at this point, there's a real question over whether the NPA is doing enough to both develop skills within its ranks to prosecute these cases and attract like highly skilled individuals to take those matters to court. And this kind of high-profile resignation of someone who had ties to all those forensic communities is going to do massive damage any way you cut it.
So Karyn, can you answer this? What has Advocate Hermoine Cronje in the past 2.5 years, it'll be 3 years next year, what has her department managed to achieve during that time?
Well, they've been doing the new lane prosecution